everyone, this is Paul Casey, the Kenpo Hall of Fame educational video series where we discuss Kenpo, principles of Kenpo, concepts, sometimes techniques, sometimes forms. Sometimes we'll just analyze Mr. Parker's infinite insights and his teachings and thoughts. And on occasion, we're very lucky to have special guests. This is coming up this year. 2021 is the Kenpo Karate Hall of Fame award ceremony, which will be taking place in Las Vegas, Nevada. The best of the best are chosen by their peers. There is no board. It is just the members deciding that an individual needs to be recognized, both men and women. We are honored today to have with us Master of the Arts, Gary Wilson, and he is here today to discuss things with us about his life. And we are truly honored that he will be inducted this week. Gary, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Paul.
It's an honor to meet you, sir. I've heard so many wonderful things about you from Mr. Dave Hebler, Grandmaster Dave Hebler, and the Hebler system. And I know you're associated with him, but you've been around a long time. Can you give us a little bit of your history of your martial arts journey?
Sure. Well, as a kid, just like everyone else, Bruce Lee and that was my idol at the time, and along with David Carradine and Kung Fu, and that's what got me interested in the martial arts. And then finally, when I got my early 20s, I was bored, didn't have anything to do, and at that time, I could afford to take martial arts lessons because my parents couldn't. And I looked up in a the yellow book phone book, and was trying to find a martial arts school. There was no internet back then. And boom, there's Ed Parker's Kenpo Karate School in Lemon Grove, California, which is where I live. And it's funny because I kind of shied away from that. I was really looking for an Oriental name because that's what, you heard back then. And seeing Ed Parker, I'm like, I don't know. So, I went down there, made an appointment. It's the only one around close by, and absolutely loved it. Did my first introductory lesson, and the gentleman that did my introductory lesson, Robert Hisquero, first thing he taught me was how to block a right step through punch. And the funny thing is, I immediately got a big smile on my face and I started laughing. I couldn't help it. And he goes, what's the deal? And I looked at him and I'm like, you're not going to believe this, but, I grew up as a street fighter. I've been in fights all my life, lived in South Lansing. I was in gangbanger fights on my way to school. So my mom and my dad both taught me that you never start a fight, but you always finish one. So they said, you take the first punch and then you go from there. Well, that was always getting blasted in the nose. So unfortunately, I got a deviated septum really bad from as many times I've been punched in the nose. But my mom said after that, you beat the shit out of them. That was her words. And she goes, you control it. So I told him, I said, if I would have known a right step through punch, I could step back and I could block it without getting hit, I would have saved myself so much pain. So I started training there January 1986 under Darby Darrow, phenomenal instructor, just incredible. And he guided me through, and took me on as a private student, eventually around purple belt. I started teaching classes for him and did private lessons with him every Wednesday, and earned my first degree black belt and second degree black belt from him. And that was my first degree was June 12th, 1993. And of course that was after, Parker had passed away. And it took me an extra year because after Mr. Parker passed away, it's funny, I wasn't training from him, I was training from Mr. Darrow, but the fact that Mr. Parker was he was the guy, I just felt after he passed away, it's like I kept teaching and I kept training, but I didn't test. And he finally said, you need to test. And that's what I did. So I tested for my first degree black belt, and then I kept going from there. Then got my first second. Then I actually went over and opened up my own school September 15th, 1997. And I was already training with Senior Grandmaster Hebler at that point. And so I'd been taking privates up at Master Danny Laxton's house in Hemet, California, when OKA was created, the Original American Kenpo Karate Association. That was after Mr. Parker passed away. And that's got going with Dave Hebler, along with, at that point, Willie Steele. And he took me on as a student and was at my school and took me all the way up through 7th degree black belt. And then after that, he moved to Alabama, and then I became one of Dave Hebler's private students, and continued training him from there. And he's taken me through 8th and 9th, and incredible man. Mr. Hebler just blows me away at times. The way he moves, and I feel very lucky to be able to train under him. And his knowledge is just incredible.
It's funny you say that. I have lots of conversations with Grandmaster Hebler, and the essence of him is that he's the real deal. It was the basis of where Kenpo came from, and we know because of our history what Kenpo, how it was derived and how it came from China through the islands, and then finally Mr. Parker brought it to the mainland. And as the father of American Kenpo, he realized he wanted to have a system that was simplistic and direct and effective against a ward of attacks. And we both know that. And Dave Hebler was right there in the beginning. Obviously, gone on, Parker had three divisions of the art. Obviously, basics, technique, and self-defense, which techniques are. And then he would go with the third one, which is sparring. But his concept of sparring, I believe, more resonated with being effective in a fight. Okay, you can practice all the techniques on a compliant, willing opponent on the mat, but that doesn't happen in real life. And we get a viewpoint of that all the time. We watch the internet; it's polluted with that, with people showing the execution of a technique, and the person will sit there and they hold their punch out like the Statue limit, Liberty or something. Which is, but that's a learning thing. It's like you sit down and you take it and you break it down. There are two quotes I'm going to use, and then I'm going to let you go right back to it. One of them is from Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu, and he says that there are three outward forms alone. It is most important to see the simplicity, to realize our true nature, to cast off selfishness, and to temper desire. He was seeking a simplistic life, not to be inundated with too much material or life, things that really have no relevance. Parker and Mr. Hebler would also agree with it, but another quote is, knowledge surely is always of time, whereas knowing is not of time. Knowledge is from a source, from an accumulation, from a conclusion, while knowing is a movement. So there's a distinction there, and that's a great quote from Bruce Lee. The point is that as Parker trained Bruce Lee, he trained Dave Hebler, and now they train you either directly or indirectly. It is one thing to know something. That's knowledge. It is also the other factor is the wisdom to understand how to use that knowledge and how to use it in the correct response to you're being challenged. You've had fights all your life. So now you went to the martial arts to clarify that and to learn how to fight correctly. What was the best lesson you ever learned working in a school, either from a teacher or from a student?
My best lesson is always when I'm teaching them is I'm learning something myself. I have taken every time I do an introductory lesson or I'm teaching a student, especially beginning though an introductory, is when I'm teaching a student how to get into a right or left neutral bow, how for them to step. You step straight back, you step to the side. Everybody moves differently. Everybody has a different way in their brain to see what it's like when they get there. So I've got to be able to figure that out, how to get them to that spot so that they have a very good toe to heel alignment, their knees are bent, their hands are in the proper position to me, it's like when I go on the mat, it's not just that I'm teaching, I feel like I'm learning at the same time. I try to take myself to their level so I can understand where they're at and then try to build them up from there. And one of the biggest things I find is that growing up on the street, I know what it's like to take a punch, and I know what it's like when you hit somebody that's streetwise. And I see this in so many, I've sat on test boards and I've been to workshops, seminars at upper black belts, bam, they get hit, they leave their head turned. And it's like, no, you're not going to do that. You just hit somebody that is streetwise, they turn their adrenaline on and off in such a heartbeat, they didn't even feel that. And you just pissed them off. So you punched them, they turn their head, they're coming back with a left if they threw a right. And you got to be ready for that. And our techniques are set up for that. Beginning level, of course, you learn like delayed sword. It can be for a push, it can be for a punch. We teach for a punch. But the thing is they've got something behind that. There's no one person can attack you and throw only a right step through punch. Behind it's going to be a left roundhouse, and that's where sword of destruction, the two of them work together. Step back, block, boom, extended outward block, and you finish your technique. And I always tell students that's the ideal phase. It's a perfect world in my school. I'm going to teach you the perfect technique. You're going to do it perfectly, and you're going to walk out the door, and it's not going to work because somebody threw this weird angle-shaped haymaker on you, and you weren't expecting it. But I said, as you go up in rank, you learn the other techniques. They blend together. They're part of the family grouping, and that technique keys off of the other one, and you need to learn to move spontaneous, to be able to react rather than think about it. You can't think about the technique. So, and that's why I put together the 446, my own system with Senior Grandmaster Hebler and Master David Stewart, which was one of my instructors back in the old school at Darby School. And we put together the system that is not as many techniques, but we want them to be extremely good at the ones that they learn. And we try to make it as well-rounded as we can. So nobody's getting anything handed to them. They have to earn it, and they have to be able to execute the techniques properly.
Well, there, the famous quote by the great treatises written by Sun Tzu, The Art of War, direct simplicity into to the point. Also, Miyamoto Musashi says in the Book of Five Rings, you train as if you're going to war. If you practice things that are irrelevant, when the conflict comes up, the body is going to have a problem. It only knows how to respond to the immediate confrontation, and fine motor skills are out the window. Right. So you have to, but that's where the wisdom comes in that you work on with these students. It's funny. You can, you point out to the neophyte, they say, oh, they think, oh my God, I learned this move. I'm now a badass in karate. You go, dude, you don't have a clue. I remember many times Parker saying, being asked that question, that is, where he would say, Mr. Parker, would you do 5 swords on the street? He looked and goes, I don't know. But the general principles are there, which stem from his boxing background. The jab, the cross, the hook. You can see that in 5 swords. The same lower body rotation. That's where the fusion comes in, and the idea of the expansion. And Parker wanted you to be a thinking man. He wanted you to figure out different options. And this is great that you have brought up a system that refines that. And I think that's really important because, like I said, in the book over there, it says what you're talking about. And I think that's a form of Zen. I truly do. I think it's a mindset, the spiritual side, because most people don't focus on the 3 facets of our martial arts journey. The physical, which we train 99% of the time to fight.
No.
Okay. The intellectual side is like, okay, Gary, please tell us how to do this. And you're like, I'm not Cliff Notes. You sort of have to understand why this thinking process was created and why sword of destruction or delayed sword or any other technique, how they work to one another for left, right combinations, or maybe right, left. It could be that. Parker was thinking that way, and you get that. But the spiritual side of your Zen telling once you understand this, you will start to discard a lot of that nonsense that you don't need.
Mm-hmm.
So let's take a little trip into the mindset of Master Gary Wilson and this system that you created. I think it'd be interesting for our viewers. Please explain, sir.
Sure. So I was doing a lot of workshops. We've had the system going for 7 or 8 years. I think about 8 years now. And Senior Grandmaster Hebler, he was actually living here in San Diego at the time. So we spent a lot of time together. And I went out on a journey and was doing workshops all over. And I was in Tennessee and I did a whole bunch of workshops all over the place. And I did some at some other schools that weren't Kenpo schools. And their basics were really good, but they didn't have the techniques. So, and with me, it's everything's self-defense. I like the fact that, you know, we're very well-rounded in American Kenpo. It's, you know, the self-defense techniques and with the sparring and everything that goes together with the forms and everything makes a good complete system. And so I came back and I was a little disappointed because I've done a lot of them in Kenpo schools, and I'm like, you know, the thing I didn't see is there's some people are rushing the system too much. They're trying to. The problem is it's very hard in modern day society to teach 24 techniques per bell. You know, I learned the right and left side, so you learn yellow, then you go for orange, and you do the yellow right and left, and then you do, you know, opposite, and so it just this big system. It's an awesome system and it's incredible. And I still teach it because I have students that come in that have heard about me, that come to the area and they're like, I want to learn that system. And that's what I teach them. Otherwise, the system I teach in my school, I don't know how long I'm going to have a student for. And I think pretty much everybody can say 7 to 9 months. If you don't have them hooked for a long time, they're gone. And I've trained thousands of students and it's like, you know, I've got a pretty good core now. But what I found is, you know, I want them to feel confident when I teach them a technique that without jumping from technique to technique to technique, that they can go out and they can defend themselves in a shorter amount of time and make it effective and be a good black belt. So I came back and I sat down with Dave Hebler and I actually got him a beer, set it down, I remember, on the table, and I said, I got some. He goes, how was your trip? I said, oh, it was great, but I got something I want to talk to you about. And he goes, okay, what's that? And I said, well, you know what? Because if you don't agree with me, that's fine. I said, punch me in the face, and he would have. And so we sat down, we were having a beer, and I said, here's the deal, you know. I want to see Kenpo. I've always wanted to see Kenpo be the biggest, the best system in the world. Not biggest by the most amount of material, but biggest by most well-known, because I feel it's the most effective. I've done tons of other systems in between, and it's the only one that I felt really works out on the street. And so I told him, I said, you know, I think at least today in my school, different schools, different areas are different, but I feel I need to teach core techniques that are really going to work on the street, that are going to be effective, that they can learn in a short amount of time, they can execute. And if I only keep them to purple belt, at least I know I taught them something that they can defend themselves when they do leave. But I would like them to stay with me. And when they make it to black belt, if they made it to black belt, now they're a core student. They put their time in, and then we start going back into the other materials. Second and third degree black belt are more techniques.
I have a question for you. So basically you give them the skills that they'll be able to defend themselves out on the street within a very short period of time. Very
Right.
simplistic, very direct, which is really the essence of any of our beginning striking techniques. Though predominantly we have a heavy jujitsu flavor to the Kenpo system, because you know, if you look at the analytical study of motion, or you get into the web of knowledge, you know, people think, oh, well, people that don't know how to fight generally are going to do what? They're going to grab, they're going to push, they're going to tackle, they're going to get on, you know, that kind of thing. And so the question, are you aware of your circumstances in your situation? So what exactly do you do in the beginning to get that person fired up so they will expand on it?
Well, in Yellow Bell, I explained to them to begin with when they start out. I talked to them about the alphabets of motion, which I think is super important, so that they can understand the basics. Because over the years, I've known people come in, they're like, the basics are boring, but the basics, that's a foundation of the system. If you don't know how to block, punch, kick, your stances, if you're wobbly, it's going to be the same out on the street. You got to feel confident within yourself. So we try to build that up right away. I let them know our basics. I teach them the basics before they learn the techniques. That way, when they do the techniques, they understand each move that they're doing. They've already learned it. They ran through it in a line, of course, mechanically, and they've done it on a bag. So they're understanding how the core part of the system works, which is a basic foundation of the system. So we really push that to them. I explain the alphabets of motion. I say, if you're doing an inward block and you're bringing your block in here instead of out here on an angle to the corner, I said, you've lost your strength. The punch is too close to your face before you even block it as a beginner. And I say, you got to learn, not only, how to the alphabets of motion, but how to pronounce, that letter phonetically, understand, that you're executing, an inward block, where it's going, what it's doing, picture that you got that punch coming at you. And then, then we start doing some drills with that. And then we start working them into the techniques. And I just try to keep them excited. With our kids, I do half ranks. So they only have to do pretty much half the material and they get their rank. But I feel I'm not going to, if I don't keep a child progressing, they're going to lose interest super fast. So within 2 months, I try to test a student, but they only get a half a rank. And if they're not ready, we have had a couple years ago, I pre-test everyone before my instructors on the floor, when they think they're ready, I sit down with a pre-test. We run them through the material and we make them nervous. And if they forget a lot of stuff, they're not ready.
Okay, those are general overviews, but I want to get more specific with you. I'm going to be challenging now. Okay. That's the nature of Ed Parker. That's what I do. Okay. So how do you break it down into, are you teaching the 24 technique system? Are you teaching the 16? Are you doing a 12, a 10? I grew up on 32 techniques per belt. So Gary, break it down. How you present your material to a student.
Okay. So, which I kind of got off track a little bit here, because when I was sitting there with Grandmaster Hebler, I told him I came up with the system on the plane on the way back that, needed a lot of perfection, but I came up with, I think it was like 53 techniques up through black belt. And he looked at me and he slammed his fist on the table and beer went everywhere and looked at me. And I thought, okay, he didn't like this. And he looks at me, he goes, exactly. He goes, I wanted to do this for years. Let's do it. He goes, except too many techniques. And I'm like, what? And he goes, yep. He goes, that's too many techniques. And so he wanted to break down to about 5. We decided on 6. So we do 6 techniques per belt, all the basics that are in each one of those before they learn it and perfect that. So, so we have 6 techniques per belt. That's what this patch is here. My school is American Family Kenpo Karate, but I put together the association. He wanted me to use basically what he had before, which was original American Kenpo Karate Association. We went to original Kenpo Karate Association and took it back to the grassroots, where he explained it and it made sense to me. He goes, in the beginning, he goes, and things have, progressed and, they've evolved, but that's in the techniques. Not necessarily does it need to evolve into so many techniques. So he said in the old days, he goes, it was 2 years pretty much, and you made black belt, you busted your ass, you worked hard, you cranked out the basics, you made them work, you demonstrated them on each other, and then he said we had like, a dozen techniques. We just did a whole bunch of different varieties of these techniques as it built through the system. And so, he goes, what, let me do something here. So he called Senior Grandmaster Chuck Sullivan and Vic LaRue, and he said, you know what, can you guys meet with us this weekend? Me and Gary. He says, Gary's got an idea that he wants to do, and I'd like you to hear it and get your opinion. So we went up there with which Mr. Sullivan had already, put together a system for the karate connection, which I think it's 56 techniques or somewhere in that area. And so we went up there, and it was an awesome afternoon, and we discussed it. And Mr. Sullivan said the same thing. Chuck says, he goes, you got it. He says, that's it. He says, you know what, the students need to be able to go out, protect themselves, learn in a shorter amount of time how to defend themselves, and be able to execute it out on the street so that it actually works. And then add whatever in later. So I call it a la carte. Once I get past third degree black belt, I say, I got the 24 technique system. Whatever you want to learn, we keep going. But
well, Mr. Parker broke that down originally with Dave and Chuck Sullivan and whatnot. There was a very rudimentary base of ideas.
Right.
He, as he always said to me, the secrets of Kenpo karate, which you would hit on, are your basics. And he took over my class one night and did it. And it was very eye-opening for those students. And I started laughing secretly, never in front of Mr. Parker. Please don't get me wrong. But one of his expansions that he developed in his Infinite Insights, in which I bet you've read, is one of them was my favorite, was the equation formula, where he could take any single move or series of movements, and he could prefix it, he could suffix it, he could insert, I'm quoting, delete, etc., etc., etc. And that was based off of Gary. Basically, that was based off of the idea of the rearrangement concept. And the idea is you don't need to have 500 techniques. You just need to understand how to adapt and use these things in as necessary. You don't force the round peg into the square hole. And that's where you're at. Simplicity, going back to that quote that I read from earlier in our discussion from the greats of Miyamoto and Sun Tzu, and also Lao Tzu. You look at these guys, and that's what life's about. You want to instill in this person that's coming there, you're going to learn something, and you're going to adapt that, because I'm, say, 6'1", but he's only 5'8", or she's 5'2", or the boy is 10. You have to learn to adapt. You can help them to understand it. So what you've done is you've made it very palatable. It's sort of like American Kenpo is like going to your favorite buffet. But what if you didn't want that night Chinese or American or Italian or whatever? But Gary, next week you're going to be in Vegas, man. You're going to see the world's greatest buffets. And there they have everything, all of them. So Gary and Dave and Paul go to the buffet, and you're going to have what you like, and he's going to have what he likes. I'm going to have, and we're all going to sit down and we're going to enjoy a meal. That's American Kenpo. Ed Parker created the greatest system that encompasses all this. Now, if you're Bruce Lee, you train with Ed Parker, you take out what you want in combat or what you need for the movies. Okay. You're somebody else and you want to focus only on, say, the forms or just the techniques. But remember, you have to have a balanced meal. So that's where the three divisions of the art, and you've done that. You approach it: basics, techniques, and the freestyle application, self-defense. Really, so you get it. So, so with that being in mind, where is Gary today? Where is your future of your martial arts journey? Where are you going?
I just enjoy doing it. It's, I'm not really looking at, there's nowhere that I need to go. I always like to learn. Everybody can teach me something. I don't look at, like, when a student walks in the door, like I said, I look at them as I'm going to learn something too when I'm teaching them. And that's what I love about the art. And I just want to show you this real quick. So we did a real simple manual. I did this with Grandmaster Hubler. And basically so when the student comes in, to make it easy for them, They got one manual. Dave came up with this with 3 boxes, and we check each one off as they learn each technique. When they get the first box, we give them a stripe on their belt. So they're being motivated all the time throughout this. And we're pushing to get that first stripe. I say, when you get your first stripe, it doesn't mean that you know that technique. It just means we taught it to you. And that tells all the instructors when you come in here, we know you've learned the material, now we just need to perfect it. So then their second stripe is their second box when they know it pretty well, but it's not good enough to test yet. And their third box is when they can do it pretty much spontaneously. We ask them to do it and just do the technique, and they can execute it as well as they can for a yellow belt. And I say that because everybody moves different. I've heard black belts over the year go, that guy will never be a black belt. He's not good enough. And it's like, how can you say that? He's as good as he's going to get. And I always look at each student as I'm going to pull as much out of them as I can. When I know I can't get any more, then that's it. It's time to move on to the next level. And then when I go to green belt, they've got a 6-month time frame in between before they can go to brown, because I'm going to run them through every single technique again and explain it to them more and get them. I tell them, I say, I want you to do delayed sword like a brown belt now, not like a yellow belt. And so we do that all the way through. I just got done pre-testing Joe Karpinski, one of my 4th degree black belts down in China Lake. And so he's earned his 5th degree, and he was supposed to be down today. We were supposed to promote him, but unfortunately he messed up his legs. So I think he's be at the Hall of Fame too. But,
that's great. I really appreciate you sharing that with us today. It's been a wonderful insight into your mind, where you've been, where you're at, and your future. And, Parker, to address that issue you just brought up with, well, this man's never going to be a black belt. Okay. That's not the goal. The goal of to be recognized as a black belt, American Kenpo, is one, you're very proficient in the basics, but you're just beginning your journey. The actual real deal, Ed Parker's going to say, is you can't wear that belt on the street. And what an embarrassment it would be if you were to get your butt whooped. When the street fighter gets there, it's the real deal. And I think the most important fact that we're learning right now, listening to Gary Wilson, Master Gary Wilson's thought process, that I want to make sure that this student is going to walk out of here and have the awareness that maybe the teachings haven't been as long as, say, others, like the gentleman that was going to test, but you're proficient enough to understand the circumstances. You have some knowledge, but you also have the wisdom on what to do. And if, as I said earlier with Ed Parker, just because you know how to fight doesn't mean you have to fight. You can walk away and you won the fight. So I'm going to quote Mr. Parker as we close here. What is truth for one may not be true for another. The real truth for both lies in the moment of actual combat. And I think you embody that. I think you are, Master Wilson, I actually think that you represent that. And the mindset is to keep it simple, keep it direct, keep it real. And with that, sir, congratulations on your nomination and soon to be inducted into the 2021 Kenpo Karate Hall of Fame. I truly look forward to seeing and meeting and spending time with you. And with no further ado, sir, salute. Thank you very much.
Thank you.